Hello, thanks for joining this lesson number 6. So today we are discussing, as for the syllabus, end-to-end encryption against security. So here on the slide share, remember you have the full syllabus so you can follow the lesson. The lesson that don't contain any kind of specific slide will be only video. Others with slides, you find everything in SlideShare. This one is without slides. So today we talk about end-to-end. So end-to-end, suppose that there is nothing in the middle. And this one is already a misconception. In fact, when we are talking about end-to-end, most of the time we talk about endpoint like a laptop connecting to a SASE service. Anyway, a laptop, an endpoint that need to connect in a secure manner to something. And so end-to-end, suppose that there is nothing in the middle, the conversation is not sniffable, the recipient of the conversation is verified, and the same concept of end-to-end is actually quite common and seen in microservices. Microservices are introducing into the password the concept of service mesh. But there is a lot of misconception around the fact that if you talk to some professional, you talk about end-to-end, and they suppose there is nothing in the middle. There is no proxy, there is absolutely nothing. And so that is just end-to-end. And for sure, the definition is a bit misleading because instead of having a component, in the case, for example, of an EDR into the endpoint, you'll have always a module that does proxy because you need to inspect SSL and everything else. I will touch upon this point later on because I want to explain the misunderstanding of the fact that proxy is dead. So when you are talking about end-to-end, sometimes people think API gateway is north-south and service mesh is east-west. That is wrong. It doesn't identify the service which direction is taking. And microservices itself is already, here you see before an end-to-end service mesh, and below you see with. If you see is the difference is the stack that is having the conversation. So microservice is supposed to have small services talking to each other. So by design, already this definition suppose that each chunk of application can connect to each other. So you expect this communication by default. The difference to introduce something like a service mesh service like Istio, for example, is the fact that you are having a component, a sidecar is generally called, that take care of the communication. Is having from a security standing point two benefit. If you see is a network connect, you remove the execution of that call at the container level and you move more on the CIDR container. And this one is already, in terms of security, is already pushing away that communication and that endpoint communication to be straight in terms of which stack is replying. And so is obviously going down to the OS network stack perspective, but is a communication that the sidecar is looking after. From a professional security professional standing point, the sidecar give you the visibility of everything happen into the service mesh. But you can't claim that there is no proxy because actually is a proxy. So what is funny is to see everybody having this personal attitude against proxy when actually everything is based on proxy. It's just renamed. Some marketing added more confusion on top of that because an end-to-end communication it just move probably a proxy most of the time from a network standing point to be straight into as a service into the endpoint. So this one comes with pros and cons. The pros are that actually you don't have certificates, you have more flexible full mesh kind of communication, but it don't take me wrong, it's not really the full picture here. Because if you take a web filtering at the endpoint in terms of a laptop that connect to your network, and you look into a solution, I take just one, for example, the Defender. So if you go into the Defender, you see that the whole structure of a Defender is anyway supposing that you could configure a proxy. The proxy can be placed into a CASB service, can be obviously that CASB function can be part of a bigger picture like a SASE to secure also DNS and everything, but it can also be standalone. But it doesn't change a key point that many professionals are forgetting, this one. So the following downloadable spreadsheet list the services and their associated URL that your network must be able to connect to. So at this stage, this is an allow list. And an allow list means that whatever is passing through that tunneled connection is not in any way inspected. So if we look at that spreadsheet, you'll find that you can guess what's the reason for example, events and all other kind of settings. But we are still talking about a proxy. Proxy historically had a lot of vulnerabilities as well. And so the fact that you add vulnerability on a network proxy was exposing the worst case scenario, the OS of a proxy in the network. The fact that you are having the proxy service into the endpoint itself means that can lead to an escalation privilege at the OS level. So I do understand the concept behind the reason to move security because there is no perimeter has to be the endpoint. But I'm in disagreement with the misconception that people does have on the fact that end-to-end means that nothing is intercepting, nothing is seeing the connection, nothing can modify the connection, or that nothing can bypass the inspection. That is another big problem because the complexity on OS suppose that each module take priority based on which level of stack it is. So you need to think when you are doing a security architecture design what that component means also from an exploitation standing point. So I don't have to tell you how many EDR bypass are out there, and I don't have to tell you how sometimes you see wonderful solution based on SASE, and at the end there is some policy that allow split tunneling and everything gets screwed. So what an infrastructure security consultant that is actually the target of this course should think of is how the proxy module is having access to the data and how get exploited and what get means. So you need to think in terms of threat modeling. Also, if a component is straight on the endpoint. When we use proxy services or any way we bind a daemon on a Linux box to listen to a certain port, obviously that port become the attack surface, localhost semicolon whatever port. That is actually opening the service. The fact that you have it into an agent, part of an EDR with privileged access to stuff that is chained because as you see the configuration of all these endpoint solution anyway, suppose even hard-coded registry key that can point to a proxy. So don't forget that sometimes you could also redirect endpoints. And the fact that you have end-to-end communication, it doesn't avoid that. Because at the time that you are compromising and changing settings is okay. Plus, you need to consider, for example, the endpoint can go in offline mode. That is a race time condition that you should consider in your picture as well. So whatever is your thinking around end-to-end need to have a structure. If you understood in my conversation, I'm dividing server kind of end-to-end conversation like the service mesh Istio like, but actually you can also integrate Falco. Forensics is having a tons of reason why you need it. I'm not saying that you don't need it. I'm just highlighting and stressing that if you are making an argument against a proxy, at the end you'll understand that proxy is everywhere. So the fact that you just moved where it is doesn't change the threat modeling and how that can become an exploitation point. And from the end-to-end conversation that many vendors stress on the fact that there is nothing that can touch because everything is happening on the box. Always think about your endpoint as a Russian doll. You is like a big onion with various layer. Each layer is having a privileged access to something in somehow. And this onion can go up from the DOM within the browser down to the inner kernel. And so when you are evaluating something, a solution, a new product, think outside the marketing terms and think about the function technically. So I hope I gave you enough food for thought to drive on your own a similar analysis. You'll find that in the past and in my channel, you have a lot of slides on how to perform infrastructure gap analysis and the methodology that is structured based on OSI layer to see how many control overlap and is done obviously including other like authentication and other components that are not part of a standard ISO. Go and have a look to those videos you'll find in my channel, and in SlideShare you find the slide too. And so you have all instrument to evaluate things, but the main value that an infrastructure security consultant is adding is his own thinking. And thinking is not a tool and is not something that somebody can teach you, because it's based also on your background experience in infrastructure, because could be based also on personal opinion from an exploitation perspective, can change based on which tools are available for exploitation as well. And so I'm trying to teach you how to argue on things and how to think on your own, standing on your own legs and trying to have a fresh view, removing all marketing and all statement. Because as you see, end to end is already giving an assumption that nothing can intercept that request, when actually you should expect that the certificate doesn't it doesn't do nothing to be subject to exploitation. So you could argue that a VPN endpoint actually always work like that. The VPN endpoint is establishing the connection. It does have the exit of IPsec or SSL VPN, and you can inspect. It's true that if it doesn't have a proxy module, it's tunneled, and so you need to have the certificates to see that. In end-to-end is completely different, because in end-to-end, be local, you do have access also to the certificates as well. So it's way more similar to what a load balancer does in terms of offloading capability to inspect. And if you see the argument that Microsoft does on let things pass to those to that list of URL that are obviously pointing to their system, you see how exfiltration can play a part as well. Because you demand everything to DNS, how do you recognize what is a Microsoft services? Through the certificate and through the DNS. But you should have obviously that certificate in the box itself, because if you recognize it is in your certificate wallet. And so you see how the picture is a bit sneaky. Obviously, you have protection that most of these solution do, like DNS pinning and other option to try to avoid these kind of attacks. But from a structural perspective, from a flow perspective, it's still there. So think and argue on everything with a technical mind and trying to understand which kind of plan B you can have when actually the endpoint is straight compromised, and compare with what is, for example, a CASB approach, and how you can control that as well. Because one of the point of endpoint security is actually to have an orchestrator, like I'm talking about Microsoft, but it doesn't matter what is. But for example, in Tune, and so you can create control within to double check what is going on. But don't forget the offline. The offline is one of the biggest erase time condition that now all these new trend will introduce. If I cut you off and I create a dev null kind of rules temporary, I can anyway work on the endpoint. And we see how it's not bulletproof because there are a lot of bypasses that actually work. So think, consider proxies and that. I just show you the most recent technical designs, how they use proxy. And so keep that in mind, and thanks for listening, and see you soon for the next lesson. Subscribe, leave me leave me a comment, and I really like to hear your opinion. I spend my best efforts on it, so let me know what you think. Okay, take care. Cheers.